Okay, can you go back to 2000, wait a sec, 2005 or 2008 study of, to see if words elicit the same neural activities as images, opera in word or and the image of opera, all right. So you mean this one, right? Yeah, so the relevant part of the response is here. That's a Sydney opera. And then this is a mean firing rate. And then this is a high tempo version. And that's this level of the activation. And when he saw the Sydney opera, that's this response. And then the high tempo is this. And the other building is like this. Does that answer your question? Same or different level is a bit difficult to do to analyze even with this level of the figure, but you need to probably look into the actual paper. That's a 2005 Nature paper, and they did the receiver operating characteristic kind of analysis. So hopefully that would satisfy your question. Is that fine? I can't hear you. You are muted. Yeah. I still can't hear you. Okay, all right, so that's fine then. All right, then let's move on. Is there any questions so far? Okay, then let's move on. So we talked about this. Okay, are there different regions, left anterior, right posterior, for different things like faces and places? So that's a great question, and it's actually not clear. And I kind of mentioned about this in the beginning here. So this is a exemplar response we reported in one of the paper as an animal category response. And this, as far as I know, is only reported in the left side of the amygdala only, but not other areas. But for any other kind of the responses, such as building neuron or face neuron or concept neuron or whatever, it seems to be present in any of these areas, such as hippocampus and the amygdala, and the right and left doesn't matter, and the entorhinal cortex and things like that. So when there is this model of the conceptual distribution here, it's probably that Rodrigo Quiroga is not thinking about this as just a single region of the hippocampus, but it's more to be like, this part may be hippocampus and this part is amygdala and this part is retrospinal spinal areas and things like that. It's highly distributed. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any further questions about this? Okay. So then, the concepts as a prototype and exemplar, that has been a sort of quite a dominant kind of a theory, right? And then here's a demonstration part for this week, which hasn't been there for up until here today. So I'm going to ask you quite simple questions. And then here, I can't do the 3AFC, so just type the words. Either, if you're shy, you can just, set the to field into 나오츠구 tsuchiya, and then or to everyone. Either way is fine. Okay, just type whatever come to in your mind. Okay, don't think about it too much. Just type the word that comes to your mind. Okay, is that cool? In terms of the instruction, it's super simple kind of instruction. If it's okay, then just raise the this thumb up, or yes, type yes in the field. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, are you guys fine already? Okay, so just be ready for typing. Okay, let's go. So the question is, type typical fish. What is the category of the typical fish? Anything is fine. And you can also type as many fish as well. Not one is limited. You don't need to limit it into one fish. Okay, so that's interesting. Maybe trout, goldfish, cod, salmon, snapper, tuna, shark. Is that all pretty much? Okay, then let's go to the next question. What is a typical pet? Again, type as many pet as you want. Okay, that's pretty much everything. So I'll just read around. Dog, cat, dog, fish, parrot. Okay, fish is probably influenced by the last question. But okay, the next one. What is the typical pet fish? Okay, so Nemo, goldfish, 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 goldfish. Okay, so the goldfish now became quite dominant. And that's probably primed by one of the responses earlier as a typical fish of a goldfish. So that's already great. And this is the kind of a finding largely consistent with this report by O'Sherton and Smith. What it means is that what it means is that when you're asked about fish, then there's a bunch of fish, kind of typical fish kind of categories and exemplars happening. And then when you are also asked about pet, there's also categories of the pet and the exemplar happening. And if the pet fish is something that is composed of and operation of the pet and the fish, then the probability that people talk about, let's say this goldfish, has to be reflective of this size of this typicality or the membership of the categories. And because today somebody reported a goldfish, many people started to talk about the goldfish here. And originally it's called a guppy. Here this is a very small, tiny, nice, small fish. And as you saw today, like as a pet fish, guppy at this stage, at this study dominated as a pet fish. But the proportion of people coming up with a guppy as a typical fish or typical pet is extremely small. And so if this really rare kind of a concept of guppy or goldfish arising from this large case of the typicality or category, then it seems a bit strange. And also I kind of alluded that the number of the words in the dictionary is 200,000 words in a Webster dictionary, but this doesn't usually include this type of the word, like a pet fish, which usually don't imagine to be an entry of the dictionary, right? Maybe currently, because this group P study became super popular, or 40 years old, maybe there's an entry of the pet fish, but something like pet fish doesn't really usually arise in the dictionary, or you don't talk about it as a concept, but you can still think about this group P as an example of this concept. But how can you do that if there is an activation pattern of the hippocampus and so on as a pattern correspond to the Luke Skywalker or fish or pet or whatever? How does this pet fish come around is not super clear, especially when this super weak kind of representation comes up as a very strong one. So that's a kind of conundrum in this category or experience of the meaning type study. And then another highly similar result has been kind of reported as asking people to report what is a fruit or vegetable, or asking people each time is this thing a typical fruit or typical vegetable. And then you might probably say that apple is it typical vegetable or fruit. You can type it into the chat box right now. Apple, is it typical fruit or vegetables? Fruit or vegetable? Fruit. Yeah, apple is usually considered as a very, very typical fruit. So here apple has this high score for this fruit, but the vegetable category very, very low, right? And then you also ask, what about broccoli? Is it a fruit or a vegetable? And then you probably say that it's a vegetable. And that's this, reflective of this high score for the broccoli here. And then very low score for fruit, right? And then this rightmost column corresponds to the sort of the weighting that is predicted from the simple, Boolean logic kind of, idea that, people would say apple is fruit or vegetable, or, okay? And then this is exactly the same as a sort of the average between these two scores for the apple and also broccoli, which makes sense. More or less, the prediction of the model and the actual, fruit or vegetable report more or less the same, concurs. The number is roughly the half, and that's sort of what this, particular models said. But what's weird here is this something like about mushroom. If I ask you whether the mushroom is fruit, most likely people say no. So this, corresponds to very, very low, probability of saying yes, mushroom is fruit. But if I also ask you, what about mushroom is a vegetable? Then you might say yes, but it's not as high as a broccoli. What's weird here is that compared to this prediction of this, mushroom is it a fruit or a vegetable? When you are asked, is mushroom fruit or vegetable? Then you start to say, most likely yes, much more frequently than individually predicted. I don't know whether you agree with this at this stage intuitively, but to me, it kind of makes sense. Something similar also happens, but in a reverse direction for the pumpkin. Pumpkin is more or less like, kind of fruit and kind of, vegetable. And then it's predicted to be like this, fruit or a vegetable. But if you are asked, is pumpkin fruit or vegetable? Then the proportion of saying yes actually reduces compared to this prediction. This is also weird, but this kind of result has been reported before. So the concept combination doesn't look like the combination of the sparsely defined neurons and its simultaneous activation or linear combination of activation to gives rise to this fruit or vegetable. But what's interesting, or what's I'm quite excited, and we are doing various experiments in the lab, is the following kind of the model. So because this is a class in psychology mainly, and you may not have heard of this quantum mechanics or quantum physics. So this is linked to the quantum physics, very minimum kind of thing. And there is this very striking experiments reported, and that is pretty much a start of this quantum physics. Description of the electron and things like that. That is the basis of our, many technology like Apple Watch or an iPhone and things like that. That all depends on this. So what happens is that when you shoot one electron, like a particle, at the time, okay, through two holes like here, and then on the screen, what you see is that the landing location of each of this electron forms like this kind of stripe pattern rather than this type of smeared kind of pattern. This is very weird, especially if this one arises from like shooting one electron at a time, and then there's one hole here, and then that results in this kind of projection. And this is actually what happens when you shoot the electron through the one hole or one slit. But if one electron is shot and then there's two holes like here, then it ends up in like this kind of wave-like pattern, stripe pattern. And the one way to explain this, and I'll come back why I'm talking about this in terms of the concepts in a couple of minutes, just bear a minute, is that, this kind of, I thought this movie is quite telling. So if you imagine that a wave is coming from the left and then there's two holes here, then these two waves interfere each other and then projects something like a spiral, stripe pattern here. And then that is predicted to also happen for this double slit experiment. So in essence, one electron is not a single tiny particle, but it should be considered as a wave. And then that wave generates this kind of interference. And what I'm finding most interesting about this concept experiment is that it's easier to explain this, previous experimental finding. Not only this guppy effect, but this pumpkin and mushroom effect, as an by thinking of a concept as a quantum. So here's how it works. So this yellowish kind of field is the probability of accepting each of the concept as either fruit here. So starting from here, and then number 8 corresponds to apple. Okay, and the number 7 here corresponds to elderberry, and they also kind of says it's acceptable as a sort of fruit, and so on. And then number 21 is a broccoli, so it's accepted very low, and its darkness is quite dark. On the other hand, if you ask, is it a vegetable, then this broccoli is, agreed, yes, quite a high intensity, so that's quite yellow, and then now apple is very low, right? And then imagine that, fruit and vegetable as two holes in your conceptual kind of a question. And then if you ask whether something is fruit or a vegetable, then these two conceptual things generate some kind of interference pattern. And the details of this so-called quantum cognition is very complicated. So I will not talk about it. But the prediction and also the confirmation is that there can be some concepts that is enhanced because of these two concepts, such as number 14, mushroom, or suppressed in the case of the pumpkin. So something like this, this conceptual combination has been dealt with in a new field of psychology or decision making called quantum cognition. And that's something that I'm quite interested in. And so to wrap up, so what is the nature of the concepts, meanings, and the consciousness and the qualia? In everyday, many concepts combines and any experience is full of combined meanings. So we need to have some kind of models and also understanding of the structure of these things. And so far, these questions have never been almost addressed in neuroscience, but in cognitive science called quantum cognition, this kind of question has been addressed. And this book by Busemeyer and Bruza is a quite nice, and it's quite an intense book, but it's a very interesting book to read if you're interested in this kind of stuff. And we are also approaching this type of the characterization of the nature of concepts, meanings, and consciousness and qualia using some mathematical tools called category theory. And then the last slide for this week. All right, so in summary, neurons in human medial temporal lobe selectively respond to concepts, but do they correspond to what we report or what we see? So it's already kind of telling, but this invariance response, so-called, that any views of the Jennifer Aniston corresponds to the responsivity of the one particular neuron, or the Sydney Opera case, the text of the Sydney Opera or view of the Sydney Opera. In terms of quality of experience, it's different, but it shows some kind of similar response. So in and of itself, it cannot be the neural correlates of conscious phenomenology per se, what we experience, right? It may be a part of it, but it's not directly that. And also two transient response is one of the issues. Like, if you see the figure very carefully, even though the duration of the experience is much longer, like 500 milliseconds or sometimes 1 second, response tends to be very, very sparse, concentrated in the beginning. So the single neurons are responsible for conscious percept, and if not, then what are the responsibility? What are responsible for the experience? Is there a better paradigm than the search for the MCC? And that's the question that we will be asking from the next week. Next week is going to be a start of the attention and the consciousness. And then afterwards, we'll go into the theory of consciousness, integrated information theory. All right, that's it for today. Is there any question?